Welcome to another action-packed episode of All Opinions Welcome. Today's guest is going to get lively. It's Andre Walker, a New York Observer columnist, a former political staffer in the House of Commons during the Cameron years, and a regular on Sky News, almost as feisty as I used to get. So, Andre, welcome to the show.
Well, hey, I've got to pull you up straight away. How on earth can you introduce me as being a staffer during David Cameron's years? That's the most embarrassing thing I've ever done. Total shame. I mean, look, of all the things I've done in my life, passed my GCSEs, passed my A-levels, gone to university, come on shows like this, don't associate me with David Cameron. It's social death round our way.
Right. So that brings me to my first probing question.
Yeah.
Who's the worst Tory Prime Minister of all time?
Well, OK, so it's definitely either David Cameron or Theresa May or John Major.
Just one of the three.
Well, I mean, it's really difficult. OK, so let's go through them one in order. First of all, I think most of the problems that we have in Europe today wouldn't have existed without the Maastricht Treaty and John Major ramming it through. As far as I'm concerned, no Conservative of any worth whatsoever could have voted for the Maastricht Treaty, and yet we had the Conservative whips and the Conservative Prime Minister fighting for it. So that's a complete catastrophe. Then you come on to David Cameron. Look, David Cameron was ashamed of this country. Yeah. David Cameron, I mean, I thought it was really embarrassing. Did you see that when Prince William gets married and they tell David Cameron to turn up in a morning suit, what I'd call appropriately dressed for a wedding? And he had this sort of hissy fit about it because he didn't want to appear to be posh. So he's a bit of a joke. Then you come on to Theresa May. I mean, just the ultimate boring manager. But I think actually I'm going to have to say Theresa May for the following reason. What her and Ollie Robbins did, I thought was simply shameful. And I'll tell you as I understand it as a Conservative. Basically, Ollie Robbins goes to Brussels and says to Michel Barnier, this is what we could get away with back home. He never negotiated on our behalf. Theresa May never negotiated on our behalf, never fought for us whatsoever. As far as she was concerned, she just capitulated. And the British public wouldn't wear it. It's shameful, so totally shameful.
There's lots of people, shall I say, on the left of the House over there getting into a hissy fit about the use of language, you know, and this feeling that it was a surrender. It was a surrender treaty, wasn't it, Theresa May's deal?
Of course.
There's no doubt about it.
Look, if you don't want to be accused of betrayal, don't betray people. But, you know, anybody watching this needs to be really careful about these Labour MPs, Jess Phillips and whatever. The problem is they are banging on their doors across their constituencies, and people are saying, I'm not going to vote Labour under any circumstance whatsoever. Now, whether it's the Conservatives that benefit from that or whether it's the Brexit Party that benefit from that, fundamentally, well, actually, even the Lib Dems to some extent are benefiting from it. Nobody is going to vote Labour at the next election, and they're angry because they have done over the British public. Let me tell you something. If you claim your ministerial salary, if you claim your shadow ministerial salary, if you claim your parliamentary salary, your job is to run the country. We voted Leave, and do you know what? Somebody walks up to Jess Phillips and says, you're a really annoying sod. Hey, deal with it, love. And I'll tell you why she has to deal with it, because it's entirely her fault. And the reason it's her fault is because they've kicked the teeth of the British people who voted to leave the European Union. It's shameful. If they don't want to be accused of betrayal, they shouldn't have betrayed us.
But you just called her love. So you're clearly a misogynist. You just gave her a way out of this argument.
Terrible
but I think that's the point. The left obsess about words and minutiae while completely ignoring the fact that betraying and ignoring the electorate is what's got us into this mess in the first place.
Hey, look, if you're offended by the word love, or if you're offended by any sort of language that somebody like me or you uses, here's the point. You should be able to elect people who disagree with me. You can't do that as long as we are in the European Union. The British Parliament is neutered, and the British Parliament loves being neutered. I cannot understand why you would spend your entire life wanting to be elected to Parliament and then simply give away all of your powers to the European Union. But actually, I do have a theory about this, particularly with the Labour Party. If you listen to people like Keir Starmer, they constantly talk about all the things that the European Union has given us. Now, whether you like the social chapter or not, the British Parliament was not incapable of passing the social chapter. The reason it didn't is because England is one of the most conservative countries on earth. And the truth of the matter is, the reason they love the European Union is because it has the ability to outvote the British people. It's not anti-democratic, it's counter-democratic. They love it because it's the enemy of freedom.
So I want to ask you a little personal question here about David Cameron. You were around that camp Is there any truth in this story about the pig's head?
I've got no idea. Oh, do you know what? It's really embarrassing, actually. I do a little bit of work for News UK, and they own HarperCollins, which published the David Cameron book. So I went into the HarperCollins shop where I get a 60% discount because I thought, I don't want him to profit from me buying the book. And honestly, I went through the index and looked for pig shagging or whatever it is. And when there was no reference to pigs, I didn't read the book. I've got no idea whether it's true or not, but I'll tell you something. You know what? I wish it were true. I wish it were true. It would be something good about the man.
So the thing is about Cameron is his book, I believe, became the biggest advert for why we should leave. He details how he went out there, he tried to negotiate on freedom of movement, they completely ignored him, they went for a long lunch and they just laughed at the UK as a territory that was under their, if you like, enslavement. And yet he still came back and voted to remain. How different history could have been if he'd have gone over there, smelt the coffee, come back and said, you know what, they're never going to change, let's vote to leave. He could have been our Churchill. Instead, what's his legacy going to be?
Do you know, I was really nervous about that referendum. So I'm a leaver, but I actually was fairly pessimistic. I genuinely thought we were going to vote to remain. But I think Jean-Claude Juncker sealed it for us. The reason he didn't give Cameron a deal is very simply this. He turned round and he said, look, the British people are secretly pro-European. Now, we know that they're the Texas of the European Union. We know they're the painful ones. We know they're the people that are always going to continually moan. But fundamentally, they're going to vote for federalism when a gun's stuck to the head. That's why I'm not going to do you a deal. He basically says, look, I'm not going to cut you a deal, Cameron, because if I cut you a deal, what I do is I derail federalism. And this referendum is about to be the biggest vote for federalism in British history. Hey, we didn't do it. But even if you are a moderate pro-European in this country, you had to vote leave in that referendum because the idea that we were going to give up all of our freedom, all of our sovereignty, we were going to have the euro immediately after that referendum. We would had to have gone in all the way and have a federal country called Europe. That is the legacy of David Cameron. That's the risk he put this country under, and he should be ashamed of that. Now, some people give him some slack and say he gave us the referendum. He did not give us the referendum, not in any way whatsoever. I worked for a Conservative MP who had a majority of something like 866. Nigel Farage and UKIP moved into the office upstairs from us and had the regional Northwest headquarters up there. And I phoned up Nigel Farage and I said, what are you doing? My boss is a Eurosceptic MP. And he said, I'm telling you, Andre, the only way that we are going to get out of the EU is if I remove Eurosceptic Conservative MPs by running against them. UKIP is a spoiler. UKIP is never going to get into power, but what it can do is it can stop all these Conservative MPs being elected, and now they hold a gun to 50 Conservative MPs in marginal constituencies, and Farage says, do you want to die in a ditch over this referendum? And that is the reason that the referendum took place. It's got nothing to do with David Cameron. It's everything to do with Nigel Farage.
And in a sense, time has stood still. I mean, here we are again. There's talks of Tory pacts between Boris and the Brexit Party, which seem to have gone cool. Do you think Boris believes in no deal?
I think it's a difficult question. I think if you're a patriot, if you believe in the future of this country, then you have to be ready to have no deal. I don't get this whole thing where people say we must have a deal. Well, hang on, we've had the famous analogy of selling a house. I've got my house, it's worth 150 grand, and you come in and go, whatever happens, we're definitely going to do a deal. Well, congratulations, it's £500,000 now. We've had all that. I mean, I genuinely think you've got to be ready to say no deal. But what deal are we talking about? 39 billion, not for a free trade deal, to negotiate the negotiations for a free trade deal, right? This idea of our economy being governed by Brussels, this idea that, look at Northern Ireland, 3/4 of its exports go to GB, and yet that's where we want to put the border in the Irish Sea. I don't know whether Boris Johnson believes in no deal, but I will tell you one thing: he's right to die in a ditch. And I'm going to tell you something else. I think what he needs to do right now, and this is going to be a bit fruity, what he needs to do right now is resign as Prime Minister, stay as Conservative leader, and let Bercow become Prime Minister.
What?
Give them what they want. Give them what they want. Let Bercow extend Article 50 and then have a general election and lets the Brexit Party and the Conservatives eviscerate these people.
I mean, that's the stuff of dreams. And funnily enough, we were in Brussels this week. The new EU President, Sassoli, in full naked glory, admitted to the entire chamber that he'd had private talks with Speaker John Bercow about the terms of a deal which would include either a second referendum or a general election. Now, Brexit Party MEP Belinda Delucy gave a magnificent speech where she shouted, "Shame on you" to Sassoli. We'll have a quick look at that now.
Thank you very much for the floor. Let me make this very clear, Mr. Sassoli. You have no right to go and speak with the UK Speaker, having conversations that are directly interfering into our domestic politics. It exposes your intentions to intervene at all levels to stop Brexit. It is immoral. Shame on you. And Mr. Barnier, I note throughout your speech, sir, you kept referring to the British negotiators as just British. We are the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and that will never change. Brexit was not a rejection of Europe or our wonderful European friends. It was a rejection of the anti-democratic nature of EU institutions, and you confirm to us every day it was right to leave. Thank you.
Yeah! So, an amazing speech from Belinda. We were banging the desks so hard, but here's the point.
Yeah.
Who's in control of this country? Why is the EU president talking to the speaker? Is that even allowed?
Well, it shouldn't be legal. You know, one thing that we've got to do when there are more Conservative MPs and when there are more Brexit Party MPs after the next election, we've got to pass a Logan Act, similar to the United States of America, that makes it a criminal offence for any nationals to negotiate with foreign powers behind the government's back. If Keir Starmer or John Bercow was an American citizen and they were going to the EU on behalf of the United States of America, they'd be locked up for it. We've absolutely got to do that. The way that people have deliberately undermined the negotiations and deliberately destroyed the British negotiating position, whatever you think of Theresa May, and I don't think much, it wasn't very easy when that evil charlatan and treasonous scumbag Jeremy Corbyn is going off to Michel Barnier, once again surrendering. And I'll tell you something about Corbyn, he surrendered every time, whether it be the IRA, whether it be Hamas, whether it be Hezbollah, whether it be the Munich terrorists. He loves a good surrender. And he went to Michel Barnier and surrendered on our behalf. That should be a criminal offence. And in future, we should pass that law and we should lock him up for it.
Funny enough, you know, again, there was a vote yesterday on should the EU get involved in foreign elections, and we think no. You know, it's no business of the EU to be lobbying governments or to be influencing foreign democracy. Yet yesterday, Joe Swinson was in Brussels, sitting down with Guy Verhofstadt, you know, negotiating something in a back room, and then Verhofstadt came out into the chamber and he said, it's not Boris Johnson who's the biggest traitor. Brexiteers are the real traitors. So this is what we're up against. You've got Corbyn lobbying, Starmer lobbying, Swinson lobbying. They're having cosy chats with John Bercow. Is it any wonder, you know, they're dangling us over the edge of a cliff until the 11th hour on Brexit?
Well, I've got to say one thing that's made me feel sick. The idea of Joe Swinson and Guy Verhofstadt in a back room together.
It was like the Addams Family, the photo. You see, check out the photo, it's grim.
Absolutely horrendous. But Guy Verhofstadt, I actually think, is an honest man. Guy Verhofstadt admits that he hates democracy. He admits the European Union should be an empire. He wants it to be treasonous to believe in Brexit. He wants a European army. He wants a European police force. He wants to lock you up and throw me in prison. That, you know, he wants to do that. He will admit it. The rest of them will not admit it. And that's why I actually quite like Guy Verhofstadt. But here's my question to you. This week, you had a bit of a run-in with Guy Verhofstadt, didn't you?
I did.
What's it like? What's he actually... I mean, look, he's one of the ugliest men I've ever seen in my life, both in terms of politics and in terms of looks. But what's that kind of like for you?
Well, they do say that politics is show business for ugly people. And I think in that sense, Verhofstadt is a superstar. Look, the thing about him, you know, he's a straight shooter.
Yes.
He uses humour. He called Boris Johnson Mrs. Doubtfire, and I stood up and said, well, you're more like Darth Vader, and this is the Death Star where democracy comes to die. And he seemed to enjoy
he loves it,
being compared to cinema's most notorious villain. He said that Brexit are the real betrayers, and I said, you just don't believe in democracy, Mr. Verhofstadt, and he sort of smiled at that. So he gives as good as he gets, but beyond the pantomime, I think he's a seriously nefarious fella. he looks like a villain and he acts like a villain. But as you say, at least he's open about it.
At least he's honest about it. You know, I often think one thing about the European Union. Look, I'm happy to have a second referendum. We leave the European.
Why?
Well, we leave the European Union, and in 10 years' time, we have a referendum on rejoining it. That to me sounds eminently sensible.
Oh, you don't mean now?
But of course not.
Yeah.
Of course not. But here's what will not happen, and they will not do, and we've still not heard them do it. You've heard people like Nigel Farage make a case for not being in the EU.
Yeah.
They are yet to make a case for federal Europe. What they keep doing is, I mean, do you remember the Nick Clegg? EU army is a dangerous fantasy. What they do is they write off everything that we say as a crazed conspiracy theory, and then 5 minutes later, it all becomes true. But you know what none of them have done? None of them have stood up and said, there is a great argument for a United States of Europe. We should have a federal Europe because insert. Or have we seen Keir Starmer or Tony Blair saying, I want us to be a state within a United States of Europe? Wouldn't it be better, rather than an independent country, for us to be a state of this country?
I think it's a good point because
but they won't.
No, because the whole debate in its entirety has been about how much worse things will be if we leave.
Yeah.
But there's been no rose-tinted version of a federal European future. Whereas the Brexiteers, I believe, do believe in the sunny uplit lands. Now we get mocked for that, but a future where we can trade outside of Europe is a positive thing, right?
Well, first of all, they failed to explain why we should give up our independence. They failed to explain it. Now, all of this, Europe is not a country, it's some sort of international club. That's crazy. Nobody believes that anymore. But there's still no positive case in favour of it. And I think that we should say, as I said a second ago, we should stand up and we should say we support a second referendum, we leave the European Union, and in 10 years' time, and you can campaign for 10 years about why we should cease to be a free and independent and democratic nation. And let them make the case.
Yeah, but what's going to be on that ticket? Look, the whole point is...
Well, there won't be anything, will there?
If it's the surrender deal or remain, it's not a referendum.
Oh, well, that referendum is crazy. I mean, I actually agree with George Galloway, which is a depressing thought.
Yeah.
Right?
Make a note of that.
Yeah, but you know, funnily enough, I was on George Galloway's TV show a couple of weeks ago, and his wife, who co-hosts it, said to me, isn't it amazing the way the left and the right have come together over this?
Yeah.
I said, I think it's thoroughly depressing.
Right.
The idea that suddenly I've got something in common with George Galloway. Do you know what I've got in common with him? I don't want our democracy to be abolished.
Yeah.
Is that what we've come to?
I think we have.
What a sad and pathetic situation. But anyway, what he said about that referendum, the referendum they want before we leave, he said, if it is two Remain options, then we've got to give them the Robert Mugabe result. We've got to let them have 90% in favour of Remain on a 30% turnout. Let's man the barricades and tell people not to vote. And no confidence democracy itself, because that's what it requires. And when I say I believe in the second referendum, I'm saying in 10 years' time, after we've left the European Union, let them make the case. And I'm telling you something, that referendum, 20% of people will vote to join the EU. 10%? Nothing. All this is a big load of scare stories, and we're allowed to swear on this bullshit.
Yeah, well, you almost said bollocks earlier, and to be fair, Verhofstadt used that word himself in Brussels, so don't worry. I think we're allowed to do that. So if there was a general election today, what do you think would happen? Because you've said before that you think Nigel Farage could become the Prime Minister. Do you still think there's an outside chance or even a bigger chance of that happening?
Well, it gets bigger every day. And I think the funny thing about Nigel Farage, as I know him, and I don't know whether you know him better than me, but...
Well, he's my boss. So.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Whereas he's my God. Look, neither Nigel Farage nor the establishment want Nigel Farage to be Prime Minister.
Yeah.
All you have to do to shut Nigel Farage up is leave the European Union. And yet it is impossible. I actually felt quite sorry for him, you know, when the night of the Brexit referendum, he and I and lots of others genuinely believed the establishment would respect the result. We didn't know that this was going to happen. Maybe we were naive, maybe we were stupid. But in terms of Nigel Farage becoming Prime Minister, look, in the end, this country will not allow itself to be ruled by Brussels. And if the only person who's going to stand up to Brussels and the only person who's going to stand up to the establishment is Nigel Farage, then Nigel Farage will be the British Prime Minister. But think about the cost of that. Think about the cost of that. The Brexit Party is a left and right coalition. You know, up north there's a lot of left-wing people. Down south there's a lot of right-wing people. You know, it doesn't want to be in government. What it wants is a free and independent Britain, and then we can all go about our business and go back to whatever we were doing before. If Nigel Farage becomes Prime Minister, it will be a manifest failure, disgusting, sickening, repulsive failure by the British establishment, because the only reason he'll go into Downing Street is to attempt to reclaim democracy. I'm a Conservative. The idea that there are significant parts of the Conservative Party who oppose freedom, who oppose democracy, who oppose an independent Britain. I had somebody say to me the other day, you can still be patriotic and believe in the EU. No, you can't. You can't be patriotic about a country you wish to abolish. That is nonsense. The idea that we have Conservative members of Parliament who wish to abolish the United Kingdom in favour of an undemocratic European superstate, that is unacceptable. The fact that Nigel Farage, having won the referendum, has to come back and form a new political party. God bless you, Martin. But the idea of you in Brussels fighting for Britain now is crazy. What on earth are we still there for? And when Verhofstadt gives you that smug grin with that ugly face of his, always remember something else. The reason he's being so damn smug is because you know and he knows that this is not over yet, that Brexit has not been won. Just because democracy says that we should leave the EU, just because a majority of the public say we should leave the EU, just because the British Prime Minister says we should leave the EU, just because the Queen says we should leave the EU, does not mean we're leaving. When you have scumbags and enemies of the British state and enemies of the British people like Keir Starmer and like Jeremy Corbyn, they've supported every enemy of this country so far, and they're doing it again.
Wow. How do you top that? Never mind Farage for Prime Minister. What about Andre Walker for Prime Minister? That was amazing, mate. Well done. Great. Hey, whatever this guy's drinking, I want two of them. In fact, shall we go for a drink after this?
Damn right.
Marvellous. Look, guys, it's kicking off in the studio. Scumbags, traitors, surrenders. It's got everything. So now it's over to you. Get involved across all of our social media platforms. Steam in, share it, subscribe, keep the debate going. It's now over to you. All opinions welcome. Thanks for tuning in.